Chapter 2. High and distinguished was the favor shown to Edmund Montague. It was by no means greater than he deserved. His face and figure were such as the imagination delights to picture as a hero of antiquity, and his character accorded well with the majestic graces of his person. Haughty and commanding in his temper, ambition was his god, and love of glory his strongest passion. Yet his very pride had the nobleness in it, and his soldiers loved, though they feared him. Very different was the character of his younger brother, Edric, whose romantic disposition and contemplative turn of mind often excited the ridicule of his friends. As usual, however, in similar cases, the persecutions he endured upon the subject only wedded him more firmly in his own particular opinions, which, indeed, he seemed determined to sustain with the consistency of a martyr, whilst he put on such a countenance of resolution and magnanimity whenever they were assailed by jests and raillery, as might have been imagined suitable for an aspiring Indian at the stake. Unfortunately, however, his friends did not always properly estimate his dignified silence, and their repeated bursts of laughter grated so harshly in the ears of the young Diogens that he became gradually disgusted with mankind. He secluded himself from society, despised the opinion of the world, because he found it was against him, and supposedly himself capable of resisting every species of temptation, simply because, as yet, he had met with nothing adequate to tempt him. Older and more experienced persons have made the same mistake. The education of these two young men had been entrusted to a tutor of characters as essentially different as those from their pupils. Father Morris, who had had the care of the elder, was an intelligent Catholic priest and confessor of the family, whilst Dr. Etterfine, who took charge of the younger, was a worthy, inoffensive man, whose passion for trying experiments was his leading foible, and whose good nature caused him to be beloved even by those to whom his follies made him appear ridiculous. Sir Ambrose Montague, the father of Edmund and Edric, was a widower, and these two sons constituted his whole family. The worthy baronet was no bad representative of what old English country gentlemen always have been, and of what it still continued, even in the age of refinement. He was as warm in his feelings, as hasty in his temper, and as violent in his prejudices as many of his predecessors. In fact, the same causes must always lead to the same results, and there is something in the country life that never fails to produce certain peculiar effects upon the mind. Sir Ambrose, however, was far superior to the geniality of his class, and amongst innumerable other good qualities, he was an indulgent master and an affectionate father. His foible, however, for alas, where shall we find character without one, was the desire to show occasionally how implicitly he could be obeyed. In general, he was easy to a fault, and it was only when he roused the opposition that the natural obstinacy of his disposition displayed itself. Edmund was his favorite son. The early military glory of a youthful hero was flattering to his paternal pride, and his eyes would glisten with delight at the bare mention of his darling's name. It was one fine evening in the summer of the year 2126, when Sir Ambrose Montague, such as we have described him, was sitting in the library, anxiously expecting intelligence from the army. To divert his impatience, he had ordered the attendance of his steward, Mr. Davis, and endeavored to amuse himself by hearing a report of the affairs of his farm. Whilst Abelard, the old butler, who had been in baronet's service for more than 40 years, stood behind his master's chair, holding a small tray, on which was placed an elegant apparatus for smoking, and a magnificent service of malleable glass, made to fold up to a pocket size when not in use, containing the baronet's evening refreshment. Sir Ambrose was above 70. His long white hair hung in waving curls upon his shoulders, as he now sat in his comfortable elastic armchair, leaning one elbow on the table before him. His features had been very handsome, and his complexion still retained the look of health and cleanliness, which, in a green old age, is sure indication of a well-spent life. His countenance, though intelligent, was unmarked by the traces of stormy passions, The cares and troubles of life seemed to have gently passed him over, and contented soothed the wrinkles what age might have made upon his brow, whilst the tall, thin figure of Mr. Davis, as he stood reverently bending forward, his hat in his hand, and his whole demeanor expressing a singular mixture of preciseness and habitual respect, contrasted strongly with the dignified appearance of his master. The windows of the library opened to the ground, and looked out upon a fine terrace, shaded by a veranda, supported by trellis work, round which twined roses mingled with vines. Below stretched a smiling valley, beautifully wooded and watered by a majestic river winding slowly along, now lost amidst the spreading foliage of the trees that hung over its banks, and then shining forth again in the sun like a lake of liquid silver. Beyond, rose hills majestically towering to the skies, their clear outline now distinctly marked by the setting sun as it slowly sank behind them, shedding its glowing tints of purple and gold upon their healthy sides, whilst some of its brilliant rays even penetrated through the leafy side of the veranda, and danced like summer lightning upon the surface of a mirror of polished steel which hung directly in the face of Sir Ambrose. "What a lovely evening!" exclaimed the worthy baronet, gazing with his delighted eye upon the rich landscape before him. "Often I have seen it looked upon in the scene. Methinks every time I see it I discover some new beauty. How finely the golden tint of the sun throws upon the tops of those trees is relieved in the deep masses of shadows below." "It is a fine evening," said Davis, bowing low. "If your honor pleases, I think we had better get the patient's stream mowing apparatus in motion tomorrow. If the sun is to be as hot tomorrow as it has been today, I am sure the hay will make without using the burning glass at all."
"Do as you like, Davis," returned his master, taking his pipe. "You know I leave these matters entirely to you."
"And does not your honor think I had better give up a barley little rain? It will be all burnt up if the weather continues, and if your honor approves, it may be done immediately, for I saw a nice little black, heavy-looking cloud sailing just by now, and I can get the electrical machine out in 5 minutes to draw it down, if your honor thinks it fit."
"I have already told you I leave these things entirely to you, Davis," returned the baronet, puffing out volumes of smoke from his hookah. "Inundate the fields if you will. You have my full permission to do whatever you please with them, so that you don't trouble me any more about the matter."
"But I would not wish to act without your honor's full conviction," resumed the persevering steward. "Your honor must be aware of the aridity of the soil, and it is impossible that exists a proper development of insipid heads unless they are surprised with the adequate quantity of moisture."
"You are very unreasonable, Davis," said Sir Ambrose. "Most of your fraternity would be satisfied by being permitted to have their own way, but you—"
"Excuse me for interrupting your honor," cried Davis, bowing profoundly, "but I cannot bear to be thought that I was capable of persuading your honor to take any steps your honor might not thoroughly approve. Now, as to the germination and ripening—"
"My good fellow!"
exclaimed Sir Ambrose, smiling at the energy with which Davis spoke, his thin figure waving backwards and forwards in the sunshine, and his earnest wish to convince his master almost depriving his voice of the solemnness and sincerest tone.
"As I said before, I give you full and free liberty to burn, dry, or ground my fields as you may think fit, empowering you to take steps you judge proper, either to germinate or ripen corn upon any part of my estate whatsoever, only permitting that in the future you never trouble me upon this subject. And so good night."
Thus being spoken in a tone of voice Davis had not declared to disobey, he slowly retired, apparently as much annoyed at having his own way as some people were having it being contradicted. And suddenly a brilliant flash of light gleamed in the baronet's polished mirror.
"Oh, what is that?"
exclaimed Ambrose, starting up and dashing his pipe on the ground. He gazed eagerly upon the mirror for a few seconds in breathless anxiety, bending forwards in listening attitude, not daring to sit, as though he feared the slightest movement might destroy the pleasing illusion. The flash was repeated again and again in rapid succession, whilst a peal of silver bells began to ring their rounds in liquid melody.
Thank God!
Exclaimed the aged baronet, sinking upon his knees and clasping his hands together, while the big tears rolled rapidly down his face.
My Edward has conquered. My Edmund is safe.
The faithful servants of Sir Ambrose followed the example of their master, and for some minutes the whole party appeared lost in silent thanksgiving, the silver bells still continuing their harmonious sweetness, though with softer and softer strains, till at last it gradually died away upon the ear. Sir Ambrose started from his knees, and the melody ceased, and desiring Abelard to summon Edric and Father Morse, he rushed upon the terrace, followed by Davis, to examine a telegraph placed upon the little distance, so as to be seen from the end of it. The light and music just mentioned being the signal always given when some important information was about to be transmitted. The sun had now sunk behind the hills, and the shades of evening were rapidly closing in on the baronet. With streaming eyes watched the various movements of the machine.
1, 2, 6, he said. Yes, that signifies he has won the battle and is safe. My heart told me so when I saw the signal flash. My darling Edmund. 2, 4, and 8. He has subdued the Germans and taken the whole of the fine province of France. 6, 6, and 4. Alas, my failing eyes are too weak to see distinctly. Davis, I implore you, look. The signal is changing before we have discovered its meaning. For mercy's sake, look before it's too late. Alas, alas, I've forgotten your eyes are as feeble as my own. Oh, Davis, where is Edric? Why is he not here to assist his poor old father at a moment such as this?
In the meantime, Edric was, as usual, engaged in the most abstract speculations with Dr. Etterfin, which now formed the only pleasure of his existence, and which he pursued with an eagerness that made all the ordinary affairs of life tasteless and stupid. The imagination had become heated by long dwelling upon the same theme, and a strange, wild, and indefinable craving to hold converse with the disembodied spirit haunted him incessantly. He had long buried his feverish anxiety in his own breast, and tried in vain to subdue it, but it seemed to hang upon his steps, to present itself wherever he went, and in short to pursue him with the malignancy of a demon. "What's the matter with you, Edric?" said Dr. Edworthen to his pupil, the day he had already mentioned. "You are so changed. Scarcely I know you, and your eyes have a wild expression, absolutely terrific." "I am indeed half mad," returned Eric with a melancholy smile, "and yet perhaps you will laugh when I tell you the reason of my uneasiness. I am tormented by an earnest desire to communicate with one who has been an inhabitant of the tomb. I would fain know the secrets of the grave, and ascertain whether the spirit be chained after death to its earthly covering of clay, condemned till the day of final resurrection, to hover about the rotting mass of corruption that once contained it, or whether at last agonizes death free it from its mortal ties, and leave it floating, free as air, in the brightless regions of ethereal space." "You know my opinion," said the doctor. "I do," replied the pupil, "but forgive me if I add, I do not feel satisfied with it. In fact, mine is not a character to be satisfied with building upon faith of any other man. I would see and judge for myself." "I do not blame you," resumed the doctor. "A reasonable being should believe nothing he cannot prove. However, to remove your doubts, I am convinced we only have occasion to step into the adjoining churchyard and try my galvanic battery on 50 surgeon power, which you must allow is surely enough to reanimate the dead, upon a body, and then—" "Hold!" cried Eric, shuddering. "My blood freezes in my veins at the thought of the churchyard. Your words recall a horrible dream that I had last night, which even now dwells on my mind and resists all efforts I can make to shake it off." "Tell me, then," resumed the doctor, "for the imagination is possessed of horrible fantasies. It is often relieved by speaking of them to another person." "I thought," said Eric, "that I was wandering in a thick, gloomy wood through which I had the utmost difficulty to make my way. Black trees, frowning in awful majesty above my head, twined together in masses so as almost to obstruct my path. Suddenly a fearful light flashed upon me, and I saw at my feet a horrid charnel horse where the dying mingled terrifically with the dead. The miserable living wretches turned and writhed in pain, striving in vain to escape from the mass of putrescence heaped upon them. I saw their eyeballs roll in agony. I watched the distortion of their features, and, making violent effort to relieve one who had almost crawled to my feet, I shrank back in horror as I found the arm I grasped give way to my touch, and the disgusting mass of corruption crumbled beneath my fingers. Shuddering, I awoke, a cold sweat hanging upon my brow, and every nerve thrilling with convulsive agony.
Mere visionary terrors, said the doctor. You have suffered your imagination to dwell upon one subject till it's become morbid. However, though I do not see any reason why your dream should make you decline my offer, I will not urge it if it gives you pain.
Is it not strange, continued Edric, apparently pursuing the current of his own thoughts, that the mind should crave so earnestly that the body shudders at, and yet how can a mass of mere matter, from which we see sink into corruption the moment the spirit is withdrawn from it, shudder? How can it even feel? I can scarcely analyze my own sensations, but it appears to me that two separate and distinct spirits animate the mass of clay that composes the human face. The one, merely a vital spark which gives it life and motion, and which we share in common with brutes, and even vegetables, and other divine ethereal spirits, which we may properly term the soul, which is the direct emanation from God himself, only bestowed upon man.
You know my sentiments upon the subject, replied the doctor. Therefore I need not repeat them.
I know, resumed Eric. You think the organs of thought, reflection, imagination, reason, and in short all the mysterious faculty in which we call the mind, material, and as long as the body remains uncorrupted they may be restored, provided circulation, and can be renewed. For that, you think the only principle to set an animal machine in motion.
Can anything be more clear? Said the doctor. We all know that circulation and the action of the lungs are inseparably connected, and that if the latter is arrested, death must ensue. How frequently the apparently dead bodies recovered in friction, which possess circulation, and inflation of the lungs with air, which restores their action. If your idea be correct, that the soul leaves the body the instant that we call death takes place, how do you account for the instances of resuscitation? Think that the soul can be recalled to the body after it has once quitted it, or that it hovers in the air attached to it by invisible ligatures, ready to be drawn back to its former situation when the body shall resume its vital functions? You cannot surely suppose it remains in a dormant state and is reawakened with the body, for this would be inconsistent with the very idea of an incorporeal spirit.
Certainly, resumed Eric. The spirit must be capable of existing perfectly distinct from the body, though how, I only candidly my imperfect reason cannot enable me to comprehend.
I wish you would overcome your childish reluctance at trying to experiment upon a corpse, and that must be your doubt's rest, for it could not succeed in reanimating a dead body that has been long entombed, so that it might enjoy the reasonable facilities, or, as you call it, its soul in perfect perfection. My opinion would be completely established.
But where shall we find a perfect body, which has been dead a sufficient time to prevent the possibility of its being only in a trance? For even if I could only conquer the repugnance, I feel that the thought of touching a mass of cold mortality that I presented in my dream last night, according to your own theory, the organs must be perfect, or the experiment will not be complete.
What do you think about trying to operate on a dumped mummy? You know, a chamber which has been recently discovered in the Great Pyramid, which is supposed to have a real tomb of Cheops, and where, it is said, the mummies of that great king and the principal personages of his household have been found in a state of wonderful preservation.
But mummies are so swathed up.
Not those of kings and princes. You know, all travelers, both ancient and modern, who have seen them, agree that they are wrapped merely in the folds of red and white linen, every finger and every toe distinct. Thus, if we can succeed in resuscitating Cheops, we need not even touch the body,
as the clothing it is wrapped in will not at all encumber its movements. It is feasible, and, as you say rightly, if we put it into execution, it will be the matter of the rest forever. I should also like to visit the pyramids, those celebrated monuments of antiquity, whose origin is lost to the obscurity of the darker ages, and which seem to have been spared by the devastating hand of time, purposely to perplex the learned. You say right, cried the doctor with enthusiasm. And who can tell but that may be a favored happy mortals, destined to raise the mystic veil that so long uncovered them. We may be destined to explore these wonderful monuments, to revive their mummies, and to force them to reveal the secrets of their prison house. Cheops is said to have built the Great Pyramid, and it is Cheops whom we shall endeavor to reanimate. What then can be more palpable than to have it should be that he who destined to link the revival in the mystery? Every word you utter, Doctor, increases my ardent desire to put our scheme into immediate execution. But how can we accomplish it? How can we obtain my father's consent? You know it has been long his intention to marry me to the niece of the Duke of Cornwall, and you know how obstinate both he and the Duke are. Then if you remain in England, it is your intention to marry Rosabella. I would perish first. If that be the case, I confess I do not see the force of your objection. True, for as long as I refuse to marry her, their anger will be the same, whether I travel or remain in England. In fact, I shall be happier at a distance from her, where I shall be annoyed by having the subject constantly recurred to. Yet it pains me to speak upon it to my father. He has long cherished the idea of my marriage, and dwelt upon it so fondly. Then you better do what he says. Relinquish all thoughts of scientific discoveries, and settle contentedly into the state of the country, employing your time in regulating your farm, and settling the disputes of your neighbors, and bringing up your children, if you should happen to have any. How can you torment me so? If you could imagine the struggle in my bosom between inclination and duty, you would pity me. Do you think your presence necessary to your father's happiness? No, if Edmund be with him, he will never think of me. And do you not think, nay, are you not certain that the union of Rosabella would make you miserable? It is impossible to doubt it. Her violent temper, and the mystery which hangs over the fate of her father, which she cannot bear to have even alluded to, forbid the thought of happiness connected with her. It is strange, so little should be known of her father. I never heard the particulars of his story. No human being knows this story, I believe, but the Duke and my father, however. I remember I've heard it rumored when I was a child that he had committed some fearful crime, that he was either executed or had destroyed himself. Then it is not surprising that it should be a pain to Rosabella to hear him spoken of. But to return to our subject, your answers have removed any doubts that can arise, and after what you have confessed yourself, I cannot imagine what further hesitation you can feel. At this moment they were both startled, and the words were arrested in the doctor's lips by a gentle tap at the door. It was old Adelard, the butler. Half ashamed with the unphilosophic terror he had evinced, the doctor felt glad to be able to hide his emotion under the appearance of anger, and demanded peevishly what the matter was. Have I not told you 100 times, continued he, that I do not like to be interrupted at my studies, and nothing is more disagreeable to me than having one's attention distracted, when it has been fixed upon an affair of importance. Do not attempt to convert the axiom which you propounded, returned Adelaide, speaking in a slow, precise manner, though he weighed every syllable he drawled forth. For undeniable facts do not admit of contradiction. However, as the message with which I stand charged at the present moment relates to Master Edric instead of yourself, I humbly opine no blame can attach itself to me on account of the unpremeditated interruption of which you allege me to be culpable. And what do you have to say to me? Demanded Harry. That the worthy gentleman, your respectable progenitor, requests you instantly to put into exercise your locomotive powers to join him on the terrace, to the end that there your superior visual facilities can afford some engagement to the menial anxiety under which he is presently laboring, by aiding him to develop the intelligence conveyed to him by the telegraphic machine. What? Exclaimed Eric eagerly, and then, without waiting a reply, he darted forward. In a few seconds, he was by the side of his father. Allard gazed after him with amazement. "There is something very astonishing," he said, addressing Dr. Entwood. "In the effervescence of animal spirits during youth, a labor under complete ataraxy upon the subject, I should think it must arise from the excessive elasticity of the nerves. Ideas strike." But here, having unfortunately to look it up, he too was struck to find Mr. Edmund had vanished with his pupil. The unwilling to taste the eloquence upon the empty air, he also departed, slowly and solemnly, however, according to his custom, to join the party assembled on the terrace.